What is up, health enthusiasts? It's Coach Lamby here for Working Weights LLC, your guide to strength, health, and all things nutrition. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Dwayne Ulrich, aka
Hey
Papa
guys,
Doral.
how's it going?
And today we are talking about artificial food colors and behavioral effects in children. All right, Dwayne, how we doing?
Doing good, man. Doing good. So to prepare for this, I went out myself and got many different flavors of drinks and foods with multiple colors.
Yeah.
And
So yeah,
I'm prepared to. Yeah. So I'm prepared to report back, but it's really difficult to draw a conclusion because I've always been a little bit hyperactive, and so. Yeah, especially if I drink like, Big Red or, grape sodas like right before bed. I don't know why it makes it hard for me to sleep. I don't know, but maybe we'll see.
Yeah,
I'm ready.
Let's get into it. So, favorable mentions here right behind Dwayne. Consuelo Health, consuelohealth.com. Go see Kathy for all your healthcare needs.
Yep.
Been forgetting to do that lately. So yeah. Dwayne, I don't know how your reading assignment went for you, but mine spiraled into like just a rabbit hole of never ending sources to look at.
Yes. In fact, it got to be a little bit overwhelming for me. So for all of our listeners right now and viewers, so Coach Lamby gave me a reading list, some homework. And he gave it to me like 2 weeks ago, which was appropriate because it was a lot. And as we're reading and we're diving, I'm reading and I'm diving down and drilling down into these studies. It was like a cartoon where the guys, where the stars start circling around the little character's head because, man, it just had my head spinning. It was just a deep dive, and it got deeper and deeper and deeper. And I had to have my wife throw me a rope so I could crawl up out of the hole.
Yeah.
And there is so much data, but in my opinion, there's not a lot that's super definitive. Now, some people may find that they may, oh, that's not true. It's truth. It's truth. Okay, there's trends and there's indicators. Some things are probably true, but some are, I don't know. There's not a lot of hard data on some of the claims that people make. And I'm not an advocate. I'm not advocating red dye number 40, but I'm just saying that in my opinion that there's a lot of wiggle room.
Okay. All right. Well, let me share my screen here. So this topic started, it kind of came to my attention because I saw this thing. Can get this thing working here. And so this article popped up several times in my social media feed and kind of brought the whole thing to the forefront for me. So I looked at this, and then it has a link to the full report here. So I'm going to read the first paragraph in here. So the title of this article, this is from Berkeley Public Health. New report shows artificial food coloring causes hyperactivity in some kids. And the first paragraph says here, a report released in April 2021 by the state of California with contributors from UC Berkeley and UC Davis confirmed the long-suspected belief that the consumption of synthetic food dyes can cause hyperactivity and other neurobehavioral issues for some children. So that, I think, that paragraph stood out very, very prominently for me because it makes a pretty specific claim here, right? So this report released supposedly confirms the long suspected belief that food dyes cause hyperactivity. And as we've talked about many topics here on the podcast, like determining causal inference from data and research is quite a monumental task to do. So I was a little skeptical that a single report managed to do that. So, but anyway, I read it and went to the report. Let me see. Am I sharing my whole screen or just the like I'm just sharing the internet? Where's my report?
Are you going for the OEHHA?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So we're going to pull that up. So this is the report here from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, the OEHHA, potential neurobehavioral effects of synthetic food dyes in children. And this is quite an assessment here. So this is 330 some odd pages long. But so as I began reading this, and of course, everything today is going to have my annotations and notes. And right here in the preface, I found, the initial discrepancy between what that UC Berkeley paragraph said, where it was, we found, so this report confirms that artificial food colors cause these effects. And so right here, in this paragraph, concerns about synthetic food dyes has recently revolved around neurobehavioral impacts in children, in particular, exacerbation of attentional problems, such as in children with ADHD and other behavioral outcomes. And so we can see in red here, in particular, exacerbation of attentional problems. So exacerbation would indicate to me that the attentional problems currently exist. They exist before the consumption of the food dye, and the food dye may be having an effect where it amplifies that attentional problem, right? So they go through the FDA approval of stuff. And then they say, since that time, clinical trials, including randomized double-blind trials, have come to light, including animal and laboratory studies. 2011, the FDA, the Food Advisory Committee of the FDA reviewed the possible association. And then we have US FDA concluded most children have no adverse effects when consuming food containing color additives, but some evidence suggests that certain children may be sensitive to them. So, I find right here in the preface of this thing that the language used in this assessment does not indicate causal inference.
No, there's no definitive statement there.
Right. So this is one of the things that I like doing about this podcast is taking stuff that we see on social media, that people may interpret, and the problem becomes from whoever wrote that article, right?
Yeah.
That is particularly misleading, and that's available to the public. People spread that around, and we have a lot of confirmation bias happening from that, and a lot of misinformation stemming from it too. So, as I read through this fella, the idea came to, well, let's explore this topic and let's run through some of the studies that they cite in here. So I think they have 27 human randomized control trials in there, something like that. And then they have a whole bunch of animal studies and what are called in vitro, basically petri dish studies that they used to come to their conclusion. And so I thought, yeah, let's explore some of this. And so within the body of the text here, they specifically named, there were 6 studies that I could find that were named at least more than once, and seemed to be the heaviest weighted studies that they're kind of hanging a lot of their conclusion on. So let me pull up.
By the way, while you're looking for that,
Hold
one of
on.
the things, okay,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just saying, by the way, while you're looking for that, one of the things that I noticed was the only things that really seem to be focused on, or that are the predominant characteristics that are focused on for kids that either have some sensitivity or allergic reactions to possibly to color dyes is hyperactivity and
Mm,
autism. And so I have some
mm.
definitive ideas to say about that, but it's not time yet. But those seem to be the primary areas that um, that people talk about all the time.
Mm.
Did you find that those are like the two hyper focused things, hyperactivity
Yeah.
and autism?
Yeah. So kind of like ADHD. So I
Yes,
think
yes,
80
yes. ADHD.
ADHD symptoms
Yeah.
is the one that we're focusing on today, ADHD symptoms. And then yeah, you're right. Like as we delve down. So the look at this thing.
That is a serious mind map.
So yeah, so I just want everybody to know, like we did, as Dwayne mentioned, I sent this to him. I think it was over 2 weeks ago. So
Yeah, yeah.
we have spent the last over 2 weeks going through this stuff. Look at that thing.
Yeah, right about there is where I lost my mind.
Yeah. Okay. So the OEHHA, I never saw autism linked in there, but certainly as I was going through the research that they
Mhm.
cited, there definitely were offshoots towards autism. So artificial food coloring is on the link between that and autism. So specifically here today, we're talking about ADHD symptoms and in particular hyperactivity and inattention.
Right.
So going through this OEHH, whatever it is,
OEHHA.
OEHHA assessment. All right. So as I'm reading through it, starting from the beginning and the problem. So it seems that they expressed concerns about neurobehavioral impacts on children, specifically the exacerbation of attention problems. And again, this tells me that there is recognition the behavior problem already exists,
Right,
and it
right.
just may be made worse by artificial food
Yes,
coloring. So
yes.
so that kind of discredits that first paragraph in that internet article that's being
Right,
shared around, right?
right, right, right,
So they kind of found that total daily exposure for children between 5 and 18 is 0.22 milligrams per kilogram per day. So kids are consuming about that much. So it's dependent upon how much they weigh, which makes sense because the more you weigh, kind of the more you eat, right?
right.
They have determined clinical trials are the gold standard. Yeah, so clinical trials are often considered a gold standard of epidemiological study design. And so why that is relevant and important is, like I said, there were 6 named studies that they seemed to apply the most weight in this assessment. So they do include studies of animals and in vitro, so the petri dish studies. And the reason that they include them is to have multiple lines of converging evidence, right, to help them
Yeah,
come to the determination.
right.
So I decided not to cover the animal studies in our review because animal studies often use doses far greater than would be seen in the real world
Yes.
in dietary quantities. And so I have a couple of those within this assessment. So page 88 and 89. Let me go back to that. All right, so here's one of the rodent studies they use, and we can see that they used 100 times. So a dose that is 100 times the European Food Safety Authority, ADI, the next one 100 times, the next one 100 times, right? So this is one of the reasons why we didn't review rodent studies. A lot of times the whole purpose of a rodent study is to find an amount where we start to see weird things happening to rodents. All
Right,
right. So I
right.
find that the inclusion of some of those studies doesn't add weight to the claim that's being made as using evidence, particularly because, so you'll notice in there, the dose was 100 times the ADI, and the ADI is usually set 100 times lower than what is called the no observable adverse effect level, right?
Right.
So
Right.
we start giving rodents a dosage until we start to see adverse effects, and then the ADI is set 100 times lower than that.
Yes.
Animal in vitro studies do not translate to human outcomes very well, right? So presumably the proposition, and we're going to talk about what the proposition is because it isn't clearly defined within that assessment or in the in that online article or even in what we find in social media posts about this stuff. So presumably the proposition is that there's an effect in human children, and human outcome data supersedes animal and in vitro data anyway. So let's just go ahead and look at the human data, and everything that I have is going to be within the show notes. You'll be linked to it. So there are a couple of articles that I've linked here, which will be available to you guys. So one is titled The Significance of Meaning. Why do over 90% of behavioral neuroscience results fail to translate to humans, and what can we do to fix it? And then the other one, Leveling the Translational Gap from Animal to Human Efficacy Data. So between these two reviews here, you'll find that and we've talked about this before, so just in drug trials, so when people are determining the efficacy of a drug, the percentage of drugs that actually make it to first phase human clinical trials, so they'll test them in animals first, and then if everything passes in the animals, it'll go to first phase human clinical trials. The percentage that make it there is around 6 to 8%.
Yeah.
So animal studies just don't, currently the way we do them just don't translate to human outcomes very well.
Yeah, we could
All
get
right.
lost, and we could get lost in all the reasons why.
Yeah.
It's just not worth talking about right now. It's not.
Yeah. So they like I say, they have 6 studies that they named within the text, and within my annotated article here that you guys can look through, you'll find that those are highlighted in purple, which I think I passed here. Okay, so purple,
Yep, there they are.
purple. And I have them named right here. And so their conclusion is artificial food colors impact neurological behavior in some children. They include animal in vitro studies, create multiple lines of evidence. Current ADI may not provide adequate protection. So as I read through there, I don't know if you found this as well. Some of the rodent trials do use doses that are around the ADI, which would be the dose they're giving to the rodent is the equivalent of the ADI for which children would
Right.
be eating. So it's that
Right.
milligram per kilogram amount. And so in some of them, they are finding some weird things happening, right? And so one of the aspects is like, hey, we're seeing a lot more of this food coloring becoming prevalent within the food environment. And in some of these rodent models, we are seeing effects that are happening around that ADI. So, there's it is possible that the ADI may not be low enough to provide adequate protection. And the reason for that is through the FDA's assessment of this back in 2011, they kind of limited themselves to or what was reported in here. So this was one of the rabbit holes, but I actually found the transcription for the 2011 FDA committee meeting.
Holy cow.
And I
That's
started reading.
amazing.
Yeah. And so, I'm going to try and make this episode as short as we can, because, things get long. People don't like listening to it, but I almost feel like this is going to be a multi-part episode because of just all the offshoots. But anyway, okay. So during the FDA committee meeting, what is reported by this OEHHA assessment is that the FDA limited themselves to clinical diagnoses of ADHD rather than the behavioral symptoms of ADHD, right? And so one of the things that they say is that you don't have to have a clinical diagnosis of ADHD to suffer from the symptoms, right? So if you have a child who drinks or not even drink, but consumes artificial food coloring and it experiences these behavioral issues like inattention, hyperactivity, and they're going to school, and these things are affecting their ability to concentrate and focus in school, that can affect, their ability to learn the information, be able to pass the grade, so on and so forth. And so, like, even though the child doesn't have an ADHD diagnosis, they can still be harmed by the consumption of these, right?
Yes.
So there's acknowledged that some dye exposure levels could be unsafe, which means some dye exposure levels are safe. So
Yes.
they do recognize that. Like, we're not saying it's all of them, but some of them could be worse than others.
Yes. I don't mean to be controversial right here,
Yeah,
but I
go
do
ahead.
want to throw something in here. Is that so? Some parents are so quick to label their own children as having ADHD
Mm,
and without having an actual diagnosis.
mhm,
Some doctors are quick to label a child as having ADHD when they don't actually have that. They just display some of the characteristics about that. Just a sidebar from that is some kids who are thought to have ADHD are often found to be just that they are exceptional children, can be easily bored in class, can be easily bored with common tasks because it's their I don't want to say intelligence, but their learning capability and their thinking capability is far above what they're being expected to do. Here,
mm.
Johnny, move this block from here to here. Seriously? Seriously, because it's so far below where they are developmentally. So just so you know, there's both sides of this coin, looking at the dyes and how they affect some children. And then you've got children who are being labeled as having developmental disorders when, you know what, they're probably ready to go faster than they're being able to do in their own classrooms.
Yeah, I could see that.
That's provable. That's provable.
Yeah.
That's provable. So,
That's
and some of
that's
you
one
are
of these
that
rabbit holes that,
it
like,
is. It is.
you get off on
I'm
this.
digging
All
out of
right.
it there right now.
Let's let's try and we'll focus on topic here. All right.
Sorry.
So going through here, all of these notes, by the way, which are in my mind map, are coming from the OEHHA assessment, and they'll be highlighted in there if you guys do so care to actually dig through this on your own. So the FDA concluded from two separate reviews, most children do not experience adverse effects when exposed to artificial food colorings. Certain children may have sensitivities to artificial food colorings. Parents should take an active role in checking ingredients and discussing with physicians. Um, there's no chemical basis for assuming all dyes have a common biological action or similar toxological profiles. So, that goes to their assessment on some dyes may be potentially worse than others. Most studies, so 78% of them that the OEHA assessment reviewed, included hyperactive children. Okay. 59% included prior responders. So we're seeing that a preponderance of the trials that they reviewed, the majority of the children within those trials are hyperactive. So they are already experiencing these issues. And then some of them are already what's the word I'm looking for here? Noted as being prior responders. So they've already been shown to respond differently to certain foods and food additives than other children. All the studies used crossover designs. I'm a huge fan of the crossover design.
Yeah,
Fantastic,
absolutely.
fantastic design. Most challenges were double blind. That's also fantastic. And crossovers were
Absolutely.
randomized.
Absolutely.
Seven studies included 7 studies. The randomization was unclear, and all but one had elimination diets. Most use validated metrics to assess behavior, most common being the Conners parent scale. And here's some links to those so you can see. Let's just open the link and look here. So this is Conners parent rating scale. So this would be the thing that the parents were given during these trials to assess their child's behavior. As we go through the trials, you guys will see, and you can kind of see here on a scale of Some of them were higher than this. So like 1 to 5, and some were 1 to 10. This one here is 0 to 3. Angry and resentful, difficulty doing or completing homework. So you guys can look through this and you can see. So it's kind of like, yeah, these are behavioral issues. Get back to my thing. And so there is a Connors parent rating 1 and 2, I think there. So one of them just may be updated. So 64% of studies found some association. 52% the association was statistically significant. Large effect sizes or statistically significant results were most commonly found from parent ratings. 4 studies found associations only from parents. 1 found associations from parents and teachers, and 2 did not find associations. We'll get into statistically significant later. So they do include, yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to mention real quick what an elimination diet is?
So no, because as we go through the trials, it'll be brought up
cool.
anyway.
Cool. Okay.
So included, they included a chart taken from a review. So I had to go find this review because I couldn't find this chart in anything that they mentioned. So this chart is taken from a review, not referenced in the assessment, and several data points were not included in this. So let me zoom in here so we can see as they're reporting the number of studies, which is on the y-axis here. And so blue would be the number of studies that found associations. Orange is the number of studies that found no associations. And so you can kind of clearly see like there is this is the chart from the study that I had to found. And what was left out in the OEHA assessment is this teacher report part right here. And a couple other things. I can't remember what they were. So, but we can see like out of all of the studies, the majority of them did find an association. Parent reports tended to have more associations reported. Teacher reports, on the other hand, vastly outnumbered with no association. So we're going to talk about that as we go through. We can see high quality studies. So the higher quality the study was, the more they found an association, the more recent the study was. And here is the link to that article that has that chart. And you guys can go into the OEHA assessment and find the chart that's missing portions of this graph, which I found to be, I don't want to say deceitful, but it's kind of like, why would you exclude some of that?
Yep.
So in the discussion of that assessment, there's acknowledgement of wide disparity in the literature. Okay. The parents were more likely to report associations than teacher or observers. This meta-analysis, Nig et al. Here in 2012, which we will go over, cites parent effect sizes. But in the assessment, they cite the unadjusted. So in Nig et al., they adjust for publication bias. And so the effect size actually drops. But in the OEHA assessment, they use the unadjusted number to report for parent ratings, which I also found to be slightly misleading. Several acknowledgments in the discussion section refer to some, certain, and sensitive children, and that sensitivities vary greatly from person to person. Acknowledgments that findings are not consistent and clear associations are not seen in all studies. These are highlighted in that assessment for you guys going through. And then finally, in their conclusion, so they conclude after extensive review, they could not find any reason in the methodology or bias of these studies that they looked at that there's no reason in the methodology or related to bias that might be producing the positive associations found in the study review. So basically they're saying the results from these studies, the positive associations, are because the artificial food colorings are causal of the behavioral issues. Would you agree with that, Dwayne? My assessment of
Not
their
really.
assessment.
Not really. Oh, your assessment is absolutely correct.
Okay.
I agree completely with that. Yeah. Yeah. So some of their conclusions I just kind of found janky. You said that like some of the things that were left off were, he didn't want to use the word deceitful, but kind of misleading. And I'm not sure those would have been the words I would have used, but they're good enough. And it just pushes a lean. It just pushes a it pushes the
Yeah,
reader in one direction.
I
That
found it to be slightly one-sided.
yes, that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah. All right, so let's get into these studies. So Nig et al., which is this meta-analysis right here. Let me make sure that this is the right one. Yes. Okay, so this is a meta-analysis. And in the abstract here, most people just read the abstract or they'll scroll all the way down to the conclusion, right? So
Right.
within the abstract here, we see that from the results, restriction diets reduced ADHD symptoms at an effect size of 0.29. And we can see the confidence intervals here. We're going to talk about confidence intervals a little bit later. So 0.07 to 0.53. For food colors, parent reports yielded an effect size of 0.18, which is what they reported in the OEHHA assessment, which decreased to 0.12 after adjustment for possible publication bias. So that part they didn't report. The effect was reliable in studies restricted to food color additives, which had an effect size of 0.21, but that effect did not survive correction for publication bias. So the trials that are restricted to food color additives only, so some of these included food preservatives and other foods. So the trials that are in a separate analysis of trials that only dealt with food color additives, the effect size was 0.21, but once they corrected for publication bias, that effect didn't survive that. All right. So it was not reliable to studies confined to food and to FDA approved food colors, which is interesting to note here. Okay. Because what we're seeing is a call for the FDA to ban artificial food colorings. And the OEHHA included this meta-analysis, which interestingly reports that the effect is not reliable when we confine the studies to FDA-approved food colors. Okay. Teacher observer reports yield a non-significant effect of 0.07. However, higher quality studies confined to color additives yielded a reliable effect of 0.22. So what they're saying there is that overall, throughout all of these studies that this particular meta-analysis included, the teacher and observer reports were very low. However, if we only look at the ones that deal with food color additives, then the effect size was kind of high for teachers and observers. And that did survive correction for publication bias. Excuse me. In psychometric tests of attention, so these would be tests administered by a psychiatrist or psychologist, the summary effect size was 0.27 and survived correction. And then they estimate that an 8% of children with ADHD may have symptoms related to synthetic food colors. And that conclusion here, so it's 8% of children with ADHD, and I looked up the percent of children with ADHD, and it's about 10%. So 8% of 10% of children may have symptoms related to synthetic food colors. So it kind of goes to, do the vast majority of kids have experience symptoms related to these food colors? And according to this meta-analysis, we would say no, the vast majority don't. There seems to be a small percent of children with ADHD, right? We don't know about without. And so their conclusion, a restriction diet benefits some children with ADHD. Effects of food colors were notable, but susceptible to publication bias or were derived from small, non-generalizable samples. Review investigation of diet and ADHD is warranted. So, as I thought about how this episode, or which probably is going to end up being multiple episodes, like how should we go about looking at this, and coming to some kind of conclusion for the reader. So I thought like maybe we should start from the point of this FDA committee and maybe review these studies and see, are we finding, is there a reason for concern about artificial food colorings from an entire public standpoint, right? Or is it only relegated to certain children? And so as I was digging through stuff, I actually found a study that listed a few of the questions that were proposed to the panel by the FDA. And I thought, well, we can answer some of those questions, right? We can go over this stuff. We can answer some of those questions and see if the FDA is correct in their assessment of this. All right. So everything that I just read in the abstract is reported right up here. All right. Now, effect sizes. So we're going to be reporting effect sizes. So an effect size of 0 to 3, 0 to 0.3, I'm sorry, is considered small. A moderate effect size is 0.4 to 0.7, and significant effect sizes are 0.8 to 1. And you guys are going to see that within some of these trials, they reference drugs that are used to treat ADHD symptoms, and those generally have effect sizes of 0.8, 0.9, and higher. And so you can see that a significant reduction or a significant effect size would be 0.8 higher. Okay, so we're looking at effect sizes. So they do cite another meta-analysis by Schwinn and Trin, and the symptoms and parent teachers.
Schwab and Trin.
Sorry, Schwab
Schwinn
and
and Trin.
Yeah, I've been reading way too much. And this meta-analysis is not available to the public. A lot of these things are not available to the public. What I could find that I could submit requests to the authors for, I did. So I'm waiting on a lot of these authors to get back to me and whether or not they'll let me have the full text of some of these things. But you can look this up if you want. So symptoms in parent ratings, but not teacher or observer ratings, it found a positive effect, and that was 0.28. And so that effect would be considered a small effect size. So that's this meta-analysis by Schwab and Trin. In this meta-analysis, cites that there are food colors allowed in Europe but are banned in the US. So something that I see a lot on social media is that there are food colorings that are banned in Europe. Certain food colors are banned in Europe. We need to ban them here because they're banned in Europe. Europe would presumably know more about health than we do, or I don't know. But anyway, so within this meta-analysis, there are food colors that are banned in the United States that are allowed in Europe. So we need to take that into consideration here. This cites the FDA review and says the evidence falls short. So the FDA review said that the evidence falls short of a causal association. This cites a qualitative review that concluded a subgroup of children with ADHD are sensitive to artificial food colors. Get down here to the results. We'll go all the way back up. Okay, so open label trials yielded a weighted response of 47.4%, which is moderate. Okay, that's a moderate effect size. However, they have extreme heterogeneity. Now, what the heterogeneity means, so hetero meaning different, homo meaning the same. When we perform a meta-analysis, what we are looking to do is to combine multiple studies together to find an overall effect size of what all of these studies are saying. When you do that, you want to combine studies that are very, very similar to one another. So if I want to know the average weight of an apple, it's very important that I weigh apples. Once I start throwing oranges and pears and tangerines into the mix, okay, so if I'm weighing a basket of apples versus a basket that has apples plus oranges plus tangerines, it's hard for me to find an average weight of the apples because the result would be confounded by other fruits. Right?
Right.
So my basket of fruit that does not contain only apples would have a high level of heterogeneity, right? There's a high level of difference of fruits within that basket.
Yes.
So when you have they report extreme. When you have extreme heterogeneity within your meta-analysis, that really means that those individual trials that they're combining together should not be combined together to find an effect size because they are so different. Okay. That leads us to have less confidence in the outcome found in the meta-analysis. Control trials yielded a weighted response of 41.5%, which again is a moderate response. And again, according to them, it had substantial heterogeneity. Okay, so again, those trials probably it's inappropriate to combine them to find a weighted response. Pooled sources, so parents, teachers, and observers. So what they did is they took all of those effects together, yielded an effect size of 0.58, which again is moderate, and that's getting up there, reaching that significant level, but again with high heterogeneity. After removing an outlier with the highest weight, the effect size fell to 0.9. So it went from basically 0.6 to 0.3. So it cut in half by removing one trial, right? And the heterogeneity fell to something that is a little bit more homogeneous. So the level of heterogeneity is acceptable. This would be considered low. All right. So after removing this one trial, the effect size cut in half. So it fell from a moderate to a small effect. And then what's left over, we would say that those reports between the parents, teachers, and observers would be okay to combine together, right?
Yes.
So our pooled sources for restriction diets shows potentially clinically meaningful significant effect of 0.29 compared to 0.9 for drug trials. So this is, again, where those effect sizes come in. So we're looking at a small effect size from the restriction diets versus a drug. So looking at 0.9, right? So you can clearly see that there's a high degree of difference between how the drugs affects behavior and the restriction diets. And then here, so the other thing with this meta-analysis in particular, so this is called a forest plot. Both of these are called forest plots. And the little boxes with the lines coming off of them would be the individual studies themselves. The 0 line would be the null line, and that means that there's no effect. So if these individual studies, if that box and the little line coming off of them, that's called the confidence interval, are on the positive side, so positive numbers, we see symptoms improve. If they were on the negative side, that means the restriction diet would worsen. And we can see that all of them, that little box, that would be the point estimate, is on the positive side. So we see improvement symptoms. And now what we see here are 5. So there's 5 studies in this meta-analysis that come up with this effect size of 0.29 versus the meta-analysis of drug trials, where we got the 0.9, the effect size of 0.9. So look at all of these studies that have been done in drug trials. There are complaints that I saw within the OEHHA assessment, along with other assessments and reports made by other consumer advocacy groups online, that the FDA considered these effect sizes small and really not clinically meaningful. Okay. So when we have an effect size from 5 studies of 0.29 versus an effect size of 0.9 from, I don't know how many studies are included there. Okay. We have much, much more confidence that the effect size of 0.9 from all of these trials is going to have a more pronounced effect within the large population of children who would be taking these drugs versus the confidence that we can have in the large population of children who might use a restriction diet to try. Okay. So we can see that even though we're looking at these effect sizes where it might say 0.29, that 0.29 for the restriction diets, or a lot of the information that we're going to see of these other trials, doesn't have as much weight to it as other effect sizes from other things like drug trials, or we find a similar effect size in the link between like saturated fat and cardiovascular disease. That's around the same at 0.3. But we're talking about, in regards to saturated fat and cardiovascular disease, you're looking at hundreds of thousands of people in trials containing hundreds of thousands of people with millions of human years of data to get an effect size of that, right? So the weight of that 0.3 is much higher than these 5 trials here, right? Am I explaining that okay? Does that make sense?
Pretty much. Yeah, I get it. I get it. Yeah, I get it. I don't think there's enough data to talk about as far as the restriction diets goes. And personally, it's really difficult with the restriction diet to determine whether or not the kid is or the person is having a change based on the fact that they're not, eating something with those dyes in them, versus maybe their plus is because they're just eating a better meal.
Yeah.
So it's not, there was nothing in the studies that I read that gave any kind of indication of that. But to me, that just makes common sense. You
Yeah.
know, if you're eating donuts that are covered in red frosting, and then you restrict that, and oh my gosh, now you're going to eat some oats, and some vegetables and some fruit.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't discussed. It was just an elimination diet.
Yeah.
So
So let me see. I'm including this here. So to answer the question from like, is the FDA correct in their assessment, right? So they've done 2 separate reviews. And then also from the point of like, would a restriction diet be beneficial for children with ADHD or children who are experiencing these ADHD symptoms? So when you have an effect size, a small effect size coming from 5 studies here. So, right, someone's making the argument that, well, these restriction diets are beneficial. So if you have a child with ADHD, remove artificial food colorings because those are causing the thing. And we're going to do this restriction diet that's going to help improve. And here's the evidence why, right? So from the standpoint of someone who's on a committee who's being petitioned to ban artificial food colorings, you might look at this evidence that's provided to you on these restriction diets versus the drug trial diets, right? And so we say, like the weight from this forest plot, from this meta-analysis versus this is not as high. This doesn't hold as much weight as this one. So I have, a little less confidence that this effect size
absolutely
is going to be meaningful for a larger population, right?
absolutely.
Okay. So, and then within all of this here, you can see, I've gone through and all of those effect sizes that we saw, the heterogeneity and blah, blah, blah. These are all individually assessed there. So this figure of 8% of children ADHD may have symptoms related to food colors. So the confidence intervals, so this was reported in the meta-analysis by the researchers, the confidence intervals for that figure would be so big that it could not be computed, okay? The confidence intervals are these little lines sticking off of the box here. So the box is the point estimate, and the smaller that box is, the more confidence that we can have that the actual point estimate falls within that box. And then the confidence interval gives us confidence. That's why it's called a confidence interval, in how powerful or how meaningful this effect size is. Okay, so we can see this box right here is really, really big and it has really small arms. And that's what we want to see, okay? Because that tells us that the majority of the effect is happening within that box, really big box, and the confidence intervals are really small, which means we don't have a lot of variation happening
Right.
within that.
That's
Okay.
the good word there.
Yes, versus a smaller box with bigger arms. So big confidence intervals it's like, well, we can't have very much confidence that that point estimate is where it needs to be. And also, a lot of the weight that's being added to that is spread out over those confidence intervals, right? So it's not that, we have 80% of the people are within this box, right? So you can see this box here, much majority of the effect is happening inside of that box than outside of it. All right. So this 8% figure that they're coming up with, the confidence intervals, so how much confidence can we have that that 8% number is actually real? We can't have very much confidence in that because the confidence intervals are so big, they couldn't be computed. Okay. And the effects are not specific to food colors. So children would also react to other food ingredients.
Right.
All right. Within the discussion of that meta-analysis, so restriction diets improve symptoms around 30% of around 30% of children diagnosed. And so the inverse of that would also be true. So if we just take on face value that small 5-trial meta-analysis actually would generalize to the broader population of children with ADHD, only about 30% of them would find some benefit from a restriction diet. So the opposite of that is true. The inverse of that is true. 70% are not going to find symptom relief from a restriction diet. The data is not reliable for FDA-approved artificial food colorings. And within that, they talk about the parent ratings. And so parent ratings, so this large effect size that we're seeing from parent ratings that the OEHHA and some of these other organizations, so the CSPI, I forget what that is, but they're the ones who petitioned the FDA in 2010 or 2011 to have this review, are leaning heavily on these parent reportings, but most of that is coming from parents outside of the US. So the petition for the FDA to ban artificial food colorings is based on evidence that
From another country.
Is not reliable for FDA-approved food colors, and is coming from reports outside of the country.
Yep.
Teacher and observer ratings fail to show effects, which is odd, right? Because if something is affecting a child's behavior, why is it that only, one portion of individuals who interact with that child are reporting differences in behavior, right? We're only seeing differences in one report versus the other. Nearly all of the studies used mixed colors, so it's impossible to determine effects from individual colors. Doses and exposures were inconsistent, so that leads to that heterogeneity, and issues with blinding procedures and verification. So there are problems with blinding, so we're going to get into that. Results from attention tests showed to be reliable for all artificial food colors. However, that's coming from a small sample size, and it's prone to single study or single participant effects. And quote from the authors here, the generalizability of these findings for clinical or policy recommendations is questionable at best.
Right.
So this sample size, so the results from this are actually coming from 68 individuals. So the significant effect for attention tests is coming from 68 individuals, and that's coming from 2 different studies. And so when you have very small sample sizes like that, a single study could hold most of the weight that you're finding that effect from. And then within that study, 1 or 2 individuals could be skewing the results.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The sample size is just too small.
Yeah. Overall, mixed conclusions must be drawn. And these are quotes from the authors. The evidence is too weak to justify action recommendations absent a strong precautionary stance. So food additives can influence ADHD symptoms 1/6 to 1/3 the size of medication effect. The average effect sizes are small in clinical terms and could be quite substantial from the perspective of population-wide prevention efforts. So this is reported from the authors there, which I don't know if it would have substantial effects from the perspective of population-wide efforts. Because again, the weight of this small trial here, it isn't going to be as pronounced in a population-wide effort as something like this drug meta-analysis, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So in conclusion, approximately 33% of children with ADHD may respond to a dietary intervention, although as many as 8% may have clear symptoms related to food colors. The source of most of this dietary response remains unclear. Okay. So Dwayne, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
If
Hit
you
me.
were gonna petition the FDA to reevaluate their stance on allowing artificial food colorings within the population to be used in the food environment for the broader population, would you cite this meta-analysis as evidence?
No.
Why?
No. Well, first of all, some of the studies we just talked about had such a small sample size, and there's a lot of weight being put into the sample, the 0.25, I think it was 0.29, compared to the drug series. And there's just too many variables that haven't been discussed or looked at. And I don't mean to get off the rails from what people are thinking, but one of the things that I just mentioned a few minutes ago was just, okay, so we didn't look at individual colors. So that didn't seem to be they didn't look at individual colors. They also didn't look at, okay, so when you do a restriction diet, how was that handled? How was that studied? Because maybe a kid's just eating better food versus just the effect of having a color dye in there. Another thing that is not would need to be studied further, at least in my mind, because it just makes common sense. One of the things that and I just jotted a few things down here. Why is the teacher reporting so much different than parent reporting, or even like a clinical psychologist or a psychologist reporting? Just think about it. A child, could it be that could it be that that the teacher doesn't really want to cast a shadow or say anything that might label a child? Maybe there's a concern about that. Or how about this? How about that a child just behaves differently in a classroom setting where there's more peer pressure, there's a more dynamic environment, more stimulating environment, maybe socially demanding, and just a better, the child is more engaged. So am I saying parents are terrible? No, but you're in a completely different environment when a child is in a classroom. So all of that stuff has to be looked at before you go in and make a suggestion. And when I say it has to be looked at, the studies have to cover all the possibilities. Hey, my dog goes into seizures when it eats Purina. Y'all need to do something. Maybe my dog has epilepsy. Maybe that batch is tainted. Maybe my dog is just crazy. There's so many other variables there that have to be looked at. So on this meta-analysis, I just can't, I wouldn't go to the FDA and say, you got to change your stuff. I think it's worth asking them to, hey, can you do some deeper study on this? And here are the reasons why I think that deeper study needs to be done. But I can't base it completely on this meta-analysis. Is that crazy?
No. So that's good. I think you make a reasonable argument for your conclusion. I would also add that that the effect sizes basically fell to nothing, or not reliable for FDA-approved food colors.
Yes.
That's a big one, right?
Yes.
So we're
Yes.
specifically petitioning the FDA to ban the food colors that they have specifically approved, and then citing a meta-analysis for which the results are not reliable for those specific food colors.
Yes. You said it so much better than I did.
So which we have to go back to the OEHA assessment here, OEHHA. They concluded after extensive review that they could not find any reason in the methodology or bias that might be producing the positive associations found in the studies reviewed.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Okay.
And also one of another factor was is maybe we didn't go over this, or I think we did, but using data from overseas. Not that they're not sharp people or anything over there, but we have no control over those details or how they did their studies. So just to use their information to make our decisions for us is like,
Well, yeah, well, it also leads to the possibility that, well, not even the possibility. We know that there are food colors that are used in Europe that are banned in the in the United
yes,
States because
yes,
we've already reviewed that information.
yes,
We know that from this meta-analysis and from the assessment that many of these trials included mixtures of
yes,
multiple food colorings.
yes, yes,
So you could be tainting the effect with these food colors that are approved in Europe, but not approved by the FDA. We don't use them here, right? So, so now we're getting to hypotheses and ultimate alternative hypotheses, and this is one that I didn't even think of, until we're discussing this just now. But it's like, well, what's to say that this effect that we're seeing um, in these studies included in this meta-analysis are just coming from one particular food coloring that's used in Europe, but it's not used here in the United States.
right. I can't remember which ones are used in Europe and aren't here,
Yeah, we
but
get.
just we'll get there in a second, but or later, I don't know when. But one of the things to think about is this: is that okay? So if it's just if it's I can't remember the numbers, but if it's yellow dye or versus red 40, that's not just the only color in there. So there are combinations of those colors used to make another color.
Hmm.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you put red and blue together and make, or red and yellow put together and make an orange. Well, is it red that's bad? Is it yellow that's bad? Or
right.
is it the combination of those two that produce some other chemical molecule that is the trigger? So, well, this analysis doesn't even talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's there. There are studies that look at the individual food colors and stuff.
Yeah, I got
Again,
lost in those too, by the way.
yeah,
I was thinking,
we're just looking at the six that were specifically named within this assessment that was linked in the online
yes,
article, right? So
yes,
that's
yes.
trying to stay on topic here because we can get off into rabbit holes.
Get
All
off
right.
my oxygen hose.
So the next study here is Bateman et al. From 2004. And let me pull this out. This is titled The Effects of a Double-Blind Placebo-Controlled Artificial Food Coloring and Benzoate Preservative Challenge on Hyperactivity in a General Population Sample of Preschool Children. And again, this will be available to you guys in the show notes for you to go over yourself. So you brought this up. Not every study is perfect, and not every individual study answers all questions. Studies answer very, very specific questions, and it's
Yes.
important to go through the whole study, the whole thing, to figure out what questions the study is answering and which questions the study is not answering. And a very big thing, which was just brought up in the Nig et al. That we just talked about, who are the study participants?
Mhm.
If we're talking about a drug that increases, I don't know, whatever, let's say heart attacks, right? And
Okay.
somebody's like, well, here's this randomized control trial, double blind, placebo controlled, and this is the evidence for why we should stop using this. Well, if the study participants in that study are a handful of people from whatever, Micronesia, right? How much generalization does that have to the rest of the world? Okay. So these are
Don't even
important.
start me.
All right. So in Bateman here, who are the study participants? These are children 3 years old from the Isle of Wight in the UK. So these are not US based children. All right. So the food colorings used, we have sunset yellow, tartrazine, carmoisine, ponsu, and sodium benzoate. So sunset yellow is FDA approved as yellow number 6. Tartrazine is FDA approved as yellow number 5. Carmoisine is not FDA approved, and Ponsu is not FDA approved. Sodium benzoate is an FDA approved preservatives. They're used very, very widely all over the world.
Yeah.
All right. So children are assessed for hyperactivity using an EAS scale and a Weiss-Wary-Peters activity scale. Now, I tried to look for these, so that Connors parent rating thing. I could not get access to these scales, so I don't know what the questions are in there. If they come available, I will, of course, update everything. Children were also tested for atopy using skin prick testing. So this basically just means we're testing to see if they have allergies. All right.
Correct.
And they prick their skin, and if you develop
A red mark.
a red mark or something within a certain diameter, then they would be considered atopic.
Right.
The children were then categorized into 4 groups. So we have hyperactive and atopic, non-hyperactive and atopic, hyperactive but non-atopic, and then non-hyperactive, non-atopic. So this this separation into the categories here kind of like lends credence to the effect that artificial food colorings might have within the general population versus just children who are diagnosed with ADHD or experience hyperactivity. So the fact that there are non-hyperactive, non-atopic children within this study helps with the generalization to the broader population, right?
Absolutely.
So the 4 groups were randomized to 2 arms. Okay, so let's say that I can't remember how many children there were. I know it says it there. Anyway, unimportant. Let's say there's 60 children in here, right? So 30 of them are randomized to, they either received placebo first and the active challenge second, and then the other 30 received the active challenge first and the placebo second. Now, this is what we call the crossover design. This is also double blind, and it's also randomized, and those are all the fantastic buzzwords that you could ask for within a trial to try and determine causality for something, right?
Yep.
So we're looking at the change within each child versus if we just had a placebo group and an active group and tried to differentiate the mean between those 2 groups. So we're actually looking at the effect on each child, right? And then we also have 2 groups where they receive a placebo first and an active first. So we're looking, is there an effect whether they receive this placebo first or whether the active one first? Great trial design. Diet periods were 4 weeks long. All 4 weeks, the children were on an artificial food coloring and a preservative-free diet. So what they did is they assessed kind of a dietary 24-hour recall. This is pretty common within these trials of what the child diet is like before they started the trial. And then they put them on a diet that removes artificial food colorings and preservatives from the diet, because what we want to do is see, we're going to give these children these fruit juice drinks, right? It's either going to have placebo or it's going to have these food colorings and preservative in it. And what we want to do is eliminate the food coloring and preservatives that they're getting from their original diet. Number 1, we don't want to see a compounding effect, right? So if they're already consuming how many milligrams per day of artificial food colorings, and then we give them more on top of that, we may not be seeing an accurate representation, right? So it could be that we're just pushing them over the limit. So we want to remove that stuff. Weeks 1 and 3, the children did not receive any challenge drinks. So week 1, they went on what they called an avoidance diet. So they removed all the artificial food colorings and preservatives. And this was basically an attempt to kind of like wash out or remove any effects that the habitual diet has. Week 2, they either received a placebo or an active drink, depending on which arm they were in. Week 3, nobody received any drink. This is called a washout period. What we want to do is remove the effect of that week 2. So you either received a placebo or an active drink, and we want to remove the effect of that on the next arm. Okay, so you have a washout period in between. Week 4, they received their other drink. Parents used the Weiss-Wary and Peters scale to report weekly behavior. They also went to clinics and psychologists tested the children's behavior and attention weekly using these validated tests. And some of these were, they observed them during free play. And then there were these games that the children had to play, dragon and a bear, hiding stickers. You guys can Google that if you're interested.
Excellent. That's all excellent, by the way.
Yeah. And then tests were validated on children beforehand to ensure the sensitivity of the test. So what they did before they put any of the children through the trial is they kind of gave the parents assessments to find which children were hyperactive, which children were not hyperactive. And then they gave all of those children these tests, and the hyperactive children ended up having higher activity scores, higher inattentive scores than the non-hyperactive children did. So they validated the test by testing all the children beforehand to make sure that the test is sensitive enough to determine if we're going to see an effect from these challenge drinks, right?
Yep.
All right, so getting down into the results here. So the parents reported reductions in hyperactivity for the avoidance diet and the washout period. So these are the 2 weeks of the trial where they were not receiving drinks. Okay, they were on this elimination diet, eliminated artificial food colorings and preservatives from the diet. They were also not receiving any of the drinks. Okay, so this is an artificial food coloring free diet that they were on during these periods, and they reported reduced hyperactivity. For the placebo arm first, so the group that received the placebo first, we see an increase in hyperactivity during the placebo and the active challenge. Let me see if I can get this in the middle. Scroll in, scroll in, scroll in. Okay, so we have an avoidance diet here. So this is baseline, this little point here. And these are the 2 groups, right? So this group received the placebo first. This group received the active challenge first. So we can see, and this is kind of backwards. So normally we would think of going up as a raise in hyperactivity or behavior problems, right? But this is actually a decrease in that. Okay, so the avoidance diet, so they went on this artificial coloring avoidance diet. Parents reported a reduction in activity. And then during the placebo, we see an increase. And the washout period, we see a reduction in activity again. During the active challenge, we see an increase in these problem behaviors. And then the same thing for the other arm, right? So basically, these 2 look the same, basically. When there were no artificial food colorings, behavior problems were reduced. When they did introduce the drink, either whether it was placebo or active, we saw behavior problems increase. The active challenge arm first showed increases in hyperactivity during both the active and the placebo. And also there were no changes for impulsivity or inattention. So this WWP scale that the parents were using rated either hyperactivity. So there were different scales, right? So you have hyperactivity and then there's inattention and impulsivity. So we don't see any changes during this time period for impulsivity or attention. So it's just kind of hyperactive behavior that changed during these time periods. Psychologist reports there's no change in behavior results noticed during any of these things. Okay. So we scroll into this. So this is what the psychologists reported here. And we can see that it just, the behaviors just didn't change during the assessments by the psychologists.
That's interesting.
Little interesting there, right? All right. So the change rated by parents yielded an effect size of 0.38 for the placebo and 0.77 for the active challenge. And the difference between the placebo and the active challenge is an effect of 0.39, which yields an overall effect of 0.51. Now I'm going to go back up here to this, and you can see I have these colored lines on here. So we talked about the point estimates and the confidence intervals. So these bars, these little T bars sticking off the top and bottom, are the confidence intervals for these challenges. One of the issues that I have with the results from this, okay, number one is that for the placebo, this is our placebo right here, and the confidence intervals are indicated by the green lines. we can see that the active challenge, point estimate, and confidence intervals lie within the confidence
The
intervals of the
placebo.
placebo.
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
And then the same thing over here. I guess I didn't put the green lines in this one. Okay, so this was the placebo challenge first, the active challenge first. And the same thing over here. We can see that if I were to draw a line of that confidence interval, it would intersect the confidence interval of the active challenge. What that tells us is that the difference between the placebo and the active challenge are statistically insignificant.
Right.
Which basically means we would say there's no difference between the two arms.
Right.
Okay. We also see, so an issue here is that we see an increase in hyperactivity during the placebo challenge. Now, the placebo contains 0 artificial food colorings, right? What should the results have been for the placebo?
No increase at all.
Should be 0.
Yeah, it should be 0.
Okay. Should be 0. And we also see this decrease during the avoidance and the washout period. Now, this trial is double-blinded, which basically means that the person who was giving out the drinks was blinded to the fact they had no idea whether this drink contained placebo or active artificial food colorings. Neither
Right.
did the parents nor the children. So
Right.
you don't know what you're getting. The problem with a trial like this is during the avoidance diet and the washout period, they didn't receive any drinks. So while the parents are blinded to whether or not their child is getting a drink that has artificial food colorings, they are not blinded to the fact that they are either receiving a drink or not receiving a drink. Right?
Yes.
They're very, very aware that they are giving their child a drink that may contain artificial food colorings in it.
Right.
Okay.
So the results are skewed by the parents' observations.
Could
or
be.
perceptions. Yeah.
Could be. Okay. So we see this difference in effect, 0.38 for the placebo and 0.77 for the active. You subtract the difference and you're left with 0.5. We see that our confidence intervals cross one another, which basically means that the placebo accounts for half the effect of the active challenge.
Yep. Yep.
Leaving the results of whether or not food coloring caused the hyperactivity behavior during the active arm is left up to a coin toss.
Exactly.
Okay, so the fact that we see, let me go back to this. Come on, scroll in. All right, we see an increase in behavior, whether or not that increase is coming from the placebo effect or the artificial food coloring is left up to a coin toss.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you have a 50% chance that it's coming from the artificial food coloring. Let me scroll back down here. All right, the effect size for the avoidance diet and the washout period is 0.5. This would be expected given the parents are not blinded to the fact that they are adding and removing food coloring from the children's diet. All right, the expectancy effects would inflate the change estimate. What that basically means is that the reduction that we see during the avoidance diet and the washout period, half of that can also be attributed to the placebo effect. All right, so the effect size for these is 0.5. So again, whether or not the reduction in behavioral symptoms comes from removing artificial colors is left up to a coin toss. The difference between parent reports and clinical tests is thought to be explained by parents spending more time with the children under less than optimal conditions. And in a clinical setting, there's less distraction and the test seen as entertainment games by the children. Now, you brought this up, Dwayne.
Yes, I did.
Okay. So this is interesting. We haven't talked about any of this at all. It's suggested that if a food additive has any effect at all, that it's via a pharmacological effect best explained by non-IgE, so it's immunoglobulin E dependent histamine release. So they're what they're saying here basically is like this is kind of the effect of this is coming from an allergic type of response. All right.
Right. Right.
Now, if the artificial food colorings are causal for hyperactivity and reduction in attention, if the food coloring is the cause of it, the change in setting, environment, or persons should not alter the result. Now, Dwayne, Mr. Ulrich, in front of this committee here, were you or were you not employed as an officer with the Houston Police Department?
Correct. Yes, I was.
During your time of employment, did you engage with citizens who were under the influence of alcohol or drugs?
Yes.
Did you ever have to arrest any of those citizens, put them in your patrol car, and take them down to, what do you call it, the station?
Jail.
Jail?
Yes. Yes, I did.
During the time from when you interacted with that citizen in public to placing them into your patrol car to taking them to jail, was there any change in behavior of those persons under the influence of drugs or alcohol that may be associated with a change of environment or persons they interact with?
Yes. Yes. You could still, the intoxication was still obvious.
Mm-hmm.
However, in an isolated scenario like the back seat of my car, they were typically less violent, typically less animated, but nevertheless, you could still tell the difference between an unintoxicated person and an intoxicated person.
Right.
So there was no doubt when I stick them in the back of my car, they're intoxicated, and all the signs are there. They're just clearly evident. The only difference was if I took them out of an environment that was highly charged and a lot of activity going on around them, then you put them into a smaller cage or a smaller place. They weren't as animated, but they were nevertheless obviously intoxicated.
Okay.
Does that
Okay. Yes. So that's good. All right. So when you get drunk, a change in the environment or persons you interact with does not change your drunken state.
Does not change your drunken state.
However, based on Dwayne's evidence or observation, personal observation here, we may see a change in behaviors, but it would not change the fact that you could tell someone was under the influence.
Clearly tell.
Okay. So these are some of the things that I found within this particular trial. So number one, we have possible confounding by an effect of the parent knowing whether or not they're giving their child food coloring or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing that there's really not a change in number one, there's no changes in impulsivity or inattention. So
Right.
getting to this point of whether or not these a restriction diet may be clinically meaningful. Well, the thought is that the hyperactivity and the effects from the artificial food coloring is going to impair a child's ability to be attentive during class. And what we see from this trial is that there's no change in inattention.
Right.
So would a restriction diet based on this trial be clinically meaningful to a larger population? I'm less than confident in saying yes, because there were no changes in inattention. So just because we may see these increases in hyperactive behavior, this doesn't give us confidence that that's going to change the ability of the child's ability to be attentive in class. And then we see that confirmed here within the test administered by the psychologist, right?
Yeah, if you can blow that up just a touch. There, whoa, that's enough. So look at the confidence levels, just go up to the top one. Reduced hyperactivity, to the avoidance diet, placebo, washout, and active change. So we were really looking at the confidence levels on the other charts, but look at the psychologist, look at his confidence levels. So
yeah, it's
there's no, even though there's some movement of the black dots, the confidence levels are dead center all the way through there. So
right. And this is assessing hyperactivity.
Right,
okay?
right, yes.
So if we're saying that, well, these food colorings, so the suspicion might be that the food colorings are going to cause potential harm to the children because they're going to be hyperactive in school, inattentive, they're going to fall behind on their learning, and their grades are going to, and that's going to put them at harm later on. We're not seeing evidence from that from this trial.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
All right. So going on to that. Okay. So at this point, we can now come to a proposition and a hypothesis for this wanting to ban the food colors here. Okay. So the proposition would be that artificial food colors cause hyperactivity or attention issues in children. And then it's also acknowledged in the OEHHA and that meta-analysis, Nig et al., artificial food colors are not causal of ADHD. So going back to that original article from Berkeley there, all right, they're not causal of the ADHD, but they may cause these hyperactivity behaviors or inattention issues, right? Artificial food coloring, so this is the hypothesis, right? So the proposition is that artificial food colors cause hyperactivity or attention issues in children. And the hypothesis is that the food colorings act on neurological functions through the IgE non-dependent histamine release. Okay, so the hypothesis is explaining why the proposition could potentially be true. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to the next article, which is Locke et al. This one's unavailable. Again, I put in a request, but going to the abstract here, all right, you can see that there was 130 children, 70 boys and 60 girls in Hong Kong. So again, not representative of the US population. And the mean age was about 8.5. This is a crossover trial again. Now this one used capsules for 3 arms. So one arm got food colorings only. The next arm got the preservative, sodium benzoate, and then the next one was a placebo. And so they report that neither the artificial food coloring or the sodium benzoate had a statistically significant effect compared to the placebo. Interesting, in the OEHHA article, they say the results of the challenge are compared to baseline and not to placebo. And I pulled this out of the OEHA assessment. Now, there's another page above this. This is not referencing McCann at all. This is referencing Locke. Is on page 48. You guys can go look it up. So they say overall, a clear relationship between food dyes and ADHD symptoms was not reported, although the results are difficult to interpret. For example, ADHD symptom scores with food dyes used are compared to scores at baseline, not placebo. However, in the abstract of this study from Locke et al., they're saying that compared to placebo, the results are non-significant. So I have another issue here with this OEHHA assessment. Okay. I mean, I don't want to call them liars, but they're
Let's
kind
just
of
say they're
misrepresenting
inaccurate.
stuff.
They're inaccurate.
Yeah. All right. So the conclusion from Locke et al., no significant association between artificial food colorings and preservatives on between the Chinese children behavior at the age of 8 and 9.
Agreed. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't ask you, Dwayne. So on this one here, where we looked at these charts, if you were to petition the FDA, would you cite this study as evidence?
No, because that, to me, first of all, I love that study. I think they did a much better job than the NIG, but that information there does not tell me conclusively that dyes have any effect, basically, on a child in the realm of hyperactivity or ADHD.
And then going to the conclusion in the OEHHA assessment, after extensive review, they could not find any reason in the methodology or bias that might be producing the positive associations found in the studies reviewed. Okay. Moving on down to McCann. All right, so next one here, McCann et al. Who are the study participants? So this one's a little more interesting. We have 153 3-year-olds. We have 144 8 and 9-year-olds, and these children are from Southampton, UK. So again, not representative of the United States. They did include children who are not hyperactive. Now, this study did a much better job of including children who would be more representative of the general population. So what they did is they actually went to schools and preschools, and they based selection criteria on the number of children who receive free school lunch. So I'm assuming Southampton is kind of a ritzy area. It sounds like it is. But to be representative, right, they picked an even distribution of children who receive free school lunch versus who don't receive free school lunch, which would give you a better representation of the overall population. Food colorings used. So the 3-year-olds, now they got the same mix that we just saw in this other trial from Bateman. But they also, in this trial, they included another mix. So mix A is the same one from Bateman. Mix B is supposed to be more representative of the habitual diet of the children of Southampton in the type of artificial coloring used and the amount. Okay. So we can see that there are differences in the amounts here. In mix A, they got 20 milligrams of artificial food colorings overall. Mix B, they got 30 overall. And then we can see some of them are different here. Now, again, 2 of these colors are FDA approved, 2 of them are not. All right, so the carmoisine is not approved, and this new one, quinoline yellow, is not FDA approved. However, they did include an Allura red, which is approved, FDA approved as red 40, and we still have yellow number 6.
Right.
Yep. All right, in the 8 and 9-year-olds, they received the same thing, mix A and mix B. But they increased mix A by 1.25 to account for the quantity of food that 8 and 9-year-olds eat versus the 3-year-olds. Okay, so mix A, they got about 25 milligrams overall. Mix B, they got about 62.5 milligrams. All right, of these food colorings in mix B. The food colorings in mix B for the 3-year-olds, they say are equivalent to 2 56-gram bags of sweet. So that's like 2 regular sized bags of candy. So like a regular bag of Skittles, 2 of those per day. For the 8 and 9-year-olds, the mix A is equivalent to 2 bags, but mix B would be equivalent to 4. So I think that mix B probably is doing a better job of being representative of the habitual diet.
I agree. Absolutely. Right? Yep.
Yeah. So the challenge protocol here, again, is mixed fruit juice. So for the 3-year-olds, they got 300 milliliters, so it's a little over a cup. The 8 and 9-year-olds, they got 625 of the fruit juice. Now, they either received mix A, mix B, or placebo. All children received all 3. But week 0, the children continued their normal diet. All right. So what they did here is they had them continue their habitual diet for 1 week. They assessed behavior and all the other things that they looked at through here on that normal diet to get a baseline reading. Okay. I'm really digging that. Week 1, withdrawal from the diet plus the placebo. All right. So for every single week of this challenge, they received a drink. So we didn't have any point in time other than week 0 where they weren't receiving a drink. They received a drink all the way through. So that's going to help to eliminate that potential bias that we saw in the first one.
Yes. Excellent.
All right. So week 1 was a withdrawal plus the placebo. So all the children basically went on a washout diet. However, they didn't know that they were doing that.
Right.
Weeks 2, 4, and 6, they received challenges, and they were randomized to getting a mix A, mix B, or placebo. Okay. Weeks 3 and 5 were washouts, where they continued on the placebo. So week 0, normal diet. Week 1 was a placebo, and it was a washout. Week 2, they got an active challenge or placebo. Week 3 was a placebo. Week 4 was an active challenge or placebo. Week 5 was a washout. Week 6 was an active challenge or placebo. All right. There was a masked testing of 2 panels of adults, and the adults could not tell the difference between the placebo or the mixed drinks. All right. They had 3 measures of behavior to calculate what they're calling a global hyperactivity score, so GHA score. So for the 3-year-olds, this is what they used. All right. We see that WWP again. And then for the 8 and 9-year-olds, they used those same 3, plus they added a computerized test, this Connor's continuous performance test. And the reason for
classroom observance too, by the way.
yes, and well, classroom observance for all of them.
Yes.
The 8 and 9-year-olds could complete a computerized test. 3-year-olds can't take a computerized test, so that's why they didn't get it right. All right, so our results here, and let me scroll in. All right, so for now, what they have here, some of this can be a little bit confusing. So they have an entire sample. So for the 3-year-old children here, the entire sample, 140 kids, 130 kids consumed 85% or more of all of the drinks. All right. And then for the complete case, there were only 73 children for which there was complete reporting from the parents, basically. So this WWP scale that the parents had to fill out, and then also, acknowledge that the children drank the drink, how much did they drink. So if you were to report all of that information in, you would be considered a complete case. There were only 73 of those children. All right, so for mix A, mix B, and placebo, so we can see between mix A, mix B, and placebo, we can see that there is a difference, right, for the entire sample. And that number increases as we get up in the quality of the information that we got back from parents, right? So we get to this complete case where the children drank 85% or more of the drink, plus we received all of the information back from the parents. We see that this effect size for mix A is higher than the entire sample. And again, pretty significantly here for mix B, and then again for placebo. Same thing for the 8 and 9-year-old children. All right, so this is overall mean global hyperactivity scores. All right. And then a bunch of that information that I just went over here. The washout periods were said to have no carryover effects, which is good. Okay, what we want to see the washout periods doing is removing effects between arms of this thing. For the 3-year-olds, all challenges reduced hyperactivity. So let me go to this graph here. All right, so we have our entire sample group with 85%, and then this is our complete case group here. So 0 is our baseline, so week 0, all right, is where we got our 0 baseline hyperactivity scores and all that stuff. We have mix A, mix B, placebo for the 3-year-old children here. A negative number means a reduction in global hyperactivity scale. And we can see for all 3 groups, for all 3 interventions, we see reductions in global hyperactivity scale. Okay. Now, in the abstract, let me go back to the abstract. Where are you here? What they report in the abstract. For the 3-year-old children, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Mix A had a significantly adverse effect compared with placebo in global hyperactivity scores for all 3-year-old children, but not mix B versus placebo. So if you were to just read the abstract, you would take away from that mix A, right, increased global hyperactivity behavior compared to the placebo. When we go to this chart, yeah, I don't know why this is so hard to scroll in. Now it's not moving.
You just did it a minute ago.
Yeah, I don't know what the deal is here. Okay. Scroll in.
Yeah, there you go. That's good enough.
Okay. So they report mix A had statistically significant increased scores from placebo. So there are some trickery about here in the reporting of this data. So when we look at the effects that we see from mix A, mix B, and the placebo compared to baseline, we see that all of them reduced hyperactivity. Agreed?
Yes.
So the red line here is 0. Everything is below the 0 line, indicating a reduction. Off to the right-hand side here, what they've done is they've taken mix A. You can see that down here. Let me do that for here. All right, so this one is easier to see. So mix A versus placebo. So 0, this dash line here would be this point estimate on the placebo. All right, so mix A, we see that the confidence interval does not touch the 0 line, which indicates that that's statistically significant, which means that the effect of mix A is more likely to happen because of the mixture rather than random chance. That's what statistically significant means. Mix B, we can see that the confidence interval crosses that 0 line, which means it's not statistically significant. However, this right-hand side of this graph that they report is inappropriate to use because they have removed the confidence intervals from the placebo. In any other trial that you looked at, let's say we were looking at a weight loss trial and we're comparing 10% fat versus 30% fat versus 50% fat, and you would find that those mean estimates would be reported with confidence intervals. No one is removing the confidence intervals of one of those and comparing it to the other two. All three of these, the placebo arm was a challenge arm.
Yes.
So to remove the confidence intervals from the placebo and say there was a statistically significant effect. So when we look at all three of these compared to one another with confidence intervals, we can see that the confidence interval of the placebo for all three of these crosses the confidence interval, and not only the confidence interval, but the point estimate for mix A and mix B, which means there is not a significant difference between mix A and mix B reported here. Now there is a downward trend from the placebo, indicating that there are more reporting there's more decrease in hyperactivity behaviors on the placebo than the other two mixtures. However, they're not statistically significant.
Right.
Okay. And also, mix A and mix B reduced hyperactive behaviors in the 3-year-olds. All right. And again here, about half the effect size can be counted for the placebo. And so I've gone in here and I've taken the the upper confidence interval from the placebo and ran it across mix A and mix B, and we can see there is not a statistically significant difference, which means the effects that we're seeing in mix A and mix B and placebo are more likely due to random chance than they are to whatever is in mix A and mix B or the placebo.
I agree.
Okay. Now let's go down to the 8 and 9-year-olds. All right. So something, I didn't show this graph on the 3-year-olds, but let me show this chart here. All right. So we have baseline GHA scores, and we also have pretrial diet. And now this pretrial diet, this number that we're seeing here is the same as the effect size for the placebo. All right. So this is the effect size of GHA scores that parents reported on the pretrial diet. Okay. This is going to be important later. All right. Now for the 8 and 9-year-olds, what we do see is that, so our baseline 0 here, we see all of them increased behaviors. Okay. We also see that the results from the placebo are statistically significant. We also see that the upper confidence interval from the placebo compared to mix A and mix B crosses the confidence intervals and the point estimate for these other two, which means the results between mix A, mix B, and placebo statistically not significant. So the difference we're seeing between mix A, mix B, and placebo is more likely due to random chance than to anything that is in mix A or mix B. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in this one, about half the effect size can be accounted for by the placebo effect.
Yep.
Okay. All right. This leads me to another alternative or an alternative hypothesis here. Okay. Which is called nocebo by proxy.
Nocebo.
Yeah. So in this study here, we have this is called placebo by proxy effect. So placebo by proxy effect is a complex dynamic phenomenon which attempts to explain a change in treatment outcome arising from an interaction between a patient and an effect from proxies such as parents, caregivers, physicians, or even the media. By extension, the effect of the proxy can also have a negative or adverse effect whereby a proxy feels worse when a patient is tested, giving rise to the possibility of a nocebo effect by proxy. Nocebo by proxy, and by extension, can influence a patient's treatment response. Such an effect could occur when a proxy observes that a treatment is ineffective or is perceived as causing adverse effects leading the patient to experience side effects. So I think everyone is probably familiar with the placebo effect, which means if I tell you this pill is going to improve your knee pain, the placebo effect means that if you actually believe it, you will probably experience a reduction in knee pain.
Yep.
Okay. The opposite of that is the nocebo effect. So if I tell you, if you are interested in a treatment for knee pain and I tell you a bunch of, I give you a bunch of evidence as to why that treatment is ineffective. If you were to go have that treatment, you could be noceboed, where that treatment actually could fix whatever is wrong with your knee, but you actually don't experience any reductions in pain due to the nocebo effect.
Yes.
All right. So I have another study here, placebo by proxy, the effect of parents' beliefs on therapy for children with temper tantrums. The placebo by proxy effect occurs when a patient's response to therapy, blah, 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 right? So we recruited 58 children aged 2 to 5. So we're seeing this 3-year-old, 4-year-old range who reported frequent tantrums and examined the effect of pharmacologically inert substance, flower essence, that is purported by the manufacturers to reduce temper tantrums. All right. So they gave them this flower essence or placebo. Okay, so here's results. Over 8 days before treatment on further 5 occasions, and over 10 days after start of treatment, compared to the period before treatment, there was a continuing reduction in tantrum frequency and severity over the 8 days of placebo treatment. There were significant day-to-day correlation between the parents' moods and tantrum frequency. So this R is a correlation coefficient. We see 0.23 and a 0.19. Where have we seen those numbers before?
Yeah.
Children's response to treatment for tantrums is associated with the beliefs and mood of the adult carer.
It seems like I might have mentioned a little bit of that myself earlier.
You might have met it. Yes. As you were saying stuff, I was like, oh, this is very interesting. So I didn't want to say anything right away, right?
Cool,
another one here, effects of sugar ingestion expectancies on mother and child interactions. So in this trial, they took a bunch of mother and children pairs, and they split them into 2 groups. One group was told that their child was receiving placebo. The other group, the mother was told that their child was receiving a large bolus of sugar, and then they assessed their interactions. All of the children received placebo. What they found was mothers in the sugar expectancy condition rated their children as significantly more hyperactive. Behavioral observations revealed that these mothers exercised more control by maintaining physical closeness, as well as showing trends to criticize, look at, and talk to their sons more than did the control group mothers.
Wow.
All right. We see this placebo effect, placebo by proxy, I'm sorry, in our pets as well. So in this trial here, so they took a bunch of dogs who experienced lameness from osteoarthritis, forgive me, and they gave the dogs placebos, telling them that it was a new drug to treat lameness. And so what they experienced here is that the caregivers had a placebo effect. So the owners of the dogs, they experienced the placebo effect around 40% of the time. When they took the dogs to the vet also was unaware that the dogs were receiving placebo. They just knew they were on some kind of new intervention trial or new drug. So the vets actually saw placebo effect 44.8% of the time when they examined them
Wow.
for lameness at a walk, and 43.1 or 44.8 for at a trot, 43.1. I'm messing that up. Anyway, about 44% of the time when the vets looked over the dogs, oh, so we have a walk, a trot, and then they manipulated the joint, right? So we see placebo effect 44% of the time from veterinarians. However, there was an actual test where they measured ground force reaction times, and the ground force reaction time is instead of being subjective, it's objective, right? Either that's going to change or it's not. It's either going to improve or it's not. And the ground force reaction times didn't change for any of the dogs. And so the caregiver placebo effect was a common in the evaluation of patient response to treatment for osteoarthritis by both pet owners and veterinarians. We have
Wow.
another trial here in
Holy
horses
cow.
dealing with head shaking. All right. So they gave the horses placebo and told the owners that they were getting a new drug or this drug would help with pet shaking. All right. So there's no significant difference between scores while on the supplement compared with placebo. However, owners reported significant improvement during all activities for both placebo and the supplement compared with pre-treatment scores. There appeared to be a significant proxy placebo effect when the outcome was based on subjective owner perception of clinical signs. All right. So if the proposition is that artificial food colors cause hyperactivity and attention issues in children, the hypothesis is that artificial food colors act on neurological functions through IgE non-dependent histamine release. The alternative hypothesis is that, according to these trials that we've seen so far, we are seeing the effect of parental nocebo by proxy, and artificial food colors are not causing hyperactive attention issues. So what evidence exists that the proposition is more expected under the hypothesis than the alternative? All right, last but not
Wow.
least, is this last? No, we're getting down here. This thing's getting long though. All right, so this Stevenson et al., let's cover this real quick. So this is a reanalysis of the trial we just looked at, okay? The Southampton, UK. And when the children were accepted into that trial, they actually took cheek swabs so that they could check them for genotyping. So this reanalysis here looked at these different single nucleotide polymorphisms, all right? And they came up with a few of them that they suspected might be related to this allergic reaction children might be having to the food coloring, okay? Why won't this thing? Okay. So there's evidence that these couple single of polymorphisms here were related to the overall GHA scores at baseline for the 3-year-old children. And in this chart here, this is indicated by my highlighted stuff. We can see the P scores, they're statistically significant. Okay. So yellow would be the 3-year-olds. So we can see these specific traits here, this HNMT, and then it has this one, HNMT. Dwayne, I didn't give you this one because this one is hard to interpret. All right, so we can see that
I am
at
not offended,
baseline.
by the way. I
Yeah,
am not offended.
I saw this one and it was like, it's very confusing. I spent a lot of time on this. All right. Okay. So at baseline, there was an association between specific SNPs, these polymorphisms, and the baseline diet of the 3-year-olds, right?
Mhm.
So then mix A relative to placebo on the ADHD symptoms were specific to these polymorphisms and whether or not the children had or did not have specific alleles. And we can see this here. So these specific ones here, so they're comparing mix A to placebo, again, not to baseline. Okay, so we can see for this HNMT, TR, whatever, right? So either the children had a T allele or they did not. And we see that the mix A compared to placebo, so if you look at those confidence intervals, right? And then again, for here, for this specific polymorphism, they were missing the C allele, mix A compared to placebo, but not if they had those alleles, right? If they had the allele, there's no difference. So this is interesting, right? So we're
Yeah.
seeing like there's kind of this trial lends credence to the possibility that there may be this genetic influence happening regarding allergic responses to this stuff. Okay. And then they say that for the rest of this stuff, for the rest of these polymorphisms in the 3-year-old group, there just wasn't any effect. Okay. So again, though, as we look here and we see the 0 line baseline, vast majority of these are below the baseline. Okay. So just like when we looked in the trial before, we'd have to say that these polymorphisms are associated with the artificial food coloring and reductions in behavior. Okay. So this may lend credence to the fact that there are specific polymorphisms within children, lending credence to that some children, right? This 8% of children with ADHD, right? So this lends credence to all of that. But for 3-year-old children, we're going to have to accept that it reduces behavior. Okay. Now this part here is interesting. There were no significant effects of any of the polymorphisms on the average, on the overall global hyperactivity aggregate levels for the 8 and 9-year-old children. This would seem odd. Remember, mix B in this trial was supposed to more accurately reflect the baseline diet of these children of Southampton, UK. So this seems odd to me that there would be no association between these polymorphisms and the baseline diet, because the children would have been consuming these artificial colors in mix B, correct?
Right.
Okay. And then I took this SNP from that trial above, I forget which one that is, McCann, to ensure that the study sample included children from the full range of socioeconomic backgrounds. Schools were recruited based on the number of children receiving free school meals, an index of social disadvantage, and the distribution of the percentage of children receiving free meals in the school taking part indicated the proportions for the city as a whole. So they did find some associations. Let me see where we go here. All right, so for the majority of these things here in the red box, no association. But again, this HNMT, they did find associations. And again, it was the kids who did not have the C allele and the kids who did not have the T allele. So between the two groups here, we have confirmation that this HNMT, these two variations of this HNMT SNP, specifically not having these alleles, seems to associate with a difference between the mix A and mix B. Now, the 8 and 9-year-old children They found no associations between these SNPs and the baseline diet, but they did find associations when they were challenged with mix A and mix B. Mix B was supposed to be more representative of what the children were currently consuming in the habitual diet. So there's an issue here, okay? That leads me to believe that there's a discrepancy. And the discrepancy I find is that these associations are based on the reported GHA scores in the study above. Okay. So they're
Yes.
only going to find associations if there was a reported increase in GHA score in the other. So basically, this association is dependent on the information given, right?
Mhm.
So
Right.
it basically comes down to garbage in, garbage out.
Truth. That's true.
Okay. And it leads me to the question: why is there an association for mix B, but there's no association for the habitual diet in these 8 and 9-year-old children? Right? If mix B is supposed to represent what they are consuming at baseline, but there's no association at baseline, how much confidence can we have then that these specific polymorphisms are the reason we're seeing scores in those children? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And so what you've pointed out is so crucial, because if there's a flaw in the previous in the previous study, where this study is taken from the previous study, then
Right.
really all this is like it's cute, but doesn't really mean anything. However, and I fell into this gap right here too, is when we're looking at that, I wanted to assign that, and it's just because of my personal belief that I believe that there are genetic markers that predispose a child to have ADHD, autism, such and such, but we're not talking about that. But
Mm.
I believe that there's genetic markers that predispose a child to having ADHD. And my basis on that, in my own opinion, just real quick, is that I know people whose children who are legit ADHD. I mean, it's obvious. They've been clinically tested. Even into young adulthood, it's like, oh yeah, man, they struggle with ADHD. And the parents that I know, who are the parents of these children, exhibit the same issues. So the parents are ADHD as well. And I see that, and it carries through. So I want to believe that those genetic markers or the polymorphisms are true. However,
Mm-hmm.
because of the flaws in the previous study, we can't really base anything off of this study.
Yeah. So in the discussion of this study, they say these findings indicate a link between histamine and ADHD symptoms and polymorphisms with the HNMT gene moderating behavioral responses to food additives. And again, that is dependent upon the results from that previous study, right?
Yes, yes.
There are limitations to these findings, although there is internal application in that the same pattern of results were found both the 3 and 8 and 9-year-olds. So that's valid, right? There is need to replicate the HNMT and food additive interactions in additional samples. The importance of such replication in gene-environment interactions has been emphasized. The effects we have shown are relatively short-term in that they reflect a 1-week exposure. And we cannot tell if the effects of food additives on ADHD symptoms and the moderation by HNMT polymorphisms would hold for longer-term exposures. Strength of the study is that the environmental risk of food additive exposure was experimentally manipulated and the effect shown using a within-person difference in a crossover design. Those are strengths, but again, it's dependent on the fact that there's a placebo effect happening in that study. So we have a placebo by proxy effect happening where even though the
Yes,
parents were receiving a drink for
yes,
all of the trial,
yes.
they were not and they were blinded to whether the drink had placebo or what arm they were in and other stuff. They were not blinded to the fact that they were in a trial that was
Yes.
looking for associations between food coloring and hyperactive behaviors, and they were not blinded to the fact that they put their child on an artificial food color removed diet,
Right,
and
right.
that they were giving their child a drink.
They had predisposed expectations already.
Right. And so the results from the study are dependent on the results. Given that the study is potentially confounded by placebo by proxy effects, these results must be taken with caution. Okay.
Garbage in, garbage out. Yep.
Now, this leads me to something that I like to do when I am online debating someone. I like to make people accept things that they don't want to have to accept on the basis of their evidence. So let's grant that these results are sound and are unconfounded. One must accept the fact that artificial food colorings, so based on this one trial, okay, that we're looking at, one must accept the fact that artificial food colors are beneficial in reducing ADHD behavior in children aged 3 to 4. Okay, if you are going to cite this study as evidence that artificial food colors have an effect on hyperactivity behavior, you are going to have to accept it as beneficial for 3 and 4-year-old children.
Right.
You would also have to accept that fruit juice, because the drinks that are given are fruit juice, and either it contains nothing or it contains mix B or mix A. You are going to have to accept fruit juice, and also the first study that we looked at, right, is just as detrimental as artificial food coloring for ADHD behavior, because the confidence intervals of all of those things cross. So the effects between mix A, mix B, and the placebo are statistically insignificant because the confidence intervals cross one another.
Right.
You would have to accept that the fruit juice with the placebo is equally as detrimental as the artificial food coloring.
Absolutely.
You would also have to accept that the habitual diet of Southampton, which would include the artificial food colorings in mix B at the same quantity of mix B, has little to no effect on ADHD behavior in children ages 8 to 9.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Right. When mix B is increased levels,
Yes.
Just to remind everybody.
Yeah, 60 milligrams. So the equivalent of 4 packages of candy per day. All right. Now this, I found this meta-analysis as I was looking for, so coming to like, what questions should we try to answer out of reviewing these studies and looking at this information? And I kind of came to like, well, let's try and put ourselves in the position of this committee, right, being asked these questions by the FDA. And so in looking for those questions, I found this meta-analysis, and this is titled like Conclusions to Die For or something. And this meta-analysis basically covers a lot of the studies that we've just talked about. And then I found the questions, right? A few of the questions that they asked the FDA asked to the council. So before we get to those, okay, this study covered most of the ones we talked about, but it also introduced some interesting things. So I found some interesting tidbits in here. So coloring has been used since like 1500 BC. The first synthetic dyes were made in 1856, created from coal tar.
Oh, Lord. Blah.
That's crazy, huh? They're still called coal tar colors. The FDA has dramatically revolutionized artificial food colorings from a time when toxic colors were indiscriminately and widely used to the present when, quote, this is from the FDA, food colorant with a 1 in 19 billion chance of causing cancer is legally considered too dangerous.
Wow. Wow.
The idea that food allergies or hypersensitivities lead to behavior and learning problems dates back to the 1920s. And then there's also a nice chart here. So going into that, there's a lot of social media posts that, well, these food colors are banned in Europe and blah, 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 blah. There's a nice chart here showing the food colors. So FD&C, this means food, something, and cosmetics. Food, drug, and cosmetics. So these are the ones that are permitted in the US, their common name. And then in Europe, people will often say that these are banned, like the one Red 40. We say that, well, Red 40 is banned in Europe. Actually, it's not. These colors are given E designations, and you can find the E designations here, and you can look those up on the food additive approved list just Google E number food additive approved list, and you will find the European food additive food list for acceptable food additives, and you will find these right there. They are not banned. Scrolling out. So they included this chart, how much food coloring consumption has increased. And it's kind of like from 1950 to 2010. Like, yeah, that's pretty significant. But however, this number here, so 60 milligrams per day per capita. So this gives credence to our mix B, right?
Yeah.
Which also
Yeah, it
lends
does.
credence to our things that we would have to make someone accept.
Right. That it
Right.
doesn't make that big a difference.
Yeah, and you would have to accept that mix B or this 60 milligrams per day amount for the 8-9-year-old children in the habitual diet of Southampton has little
Right.
to no effect on
Right.
ADHD behaviors.
Right. Right.
All right. But just because we see an increase in consumption, correlation doesn't explain the hypothesis. Okay, so we can equally say that. So a lot of people will say, well, we're seeing, more diagnoses of ADHD. We're consuming more artificial food colorings, therefore, right? But we can also say, well, the level of sophistication and the technology and the time spent playing with children's toys would also directly correlate with ADHD, hyperactivity, and allergy diagnoses and rates, right?
Yep. Yep.
So just because two things correlate, it doesn't explain. We also have, lower rates of these diagnoses for allergies, ADHD, and all stuff could be due in lower rates in the past could just be due to survivorship bias. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And this validates our stuff in before. All right. So a few more studies that they had, and this just the rabbit trail, the spiraling spider web of all this stuff. And I want to continue with a lot of these things because I do find this stuff interesting. So there's Benjamin Feingold here. He's kind of the one who created this elimination diet that we saw in the other trials.
Yep.
And here's links to all of this stuff. And I actually did find this book. So if anyone is interested in this diet, maybe you want to put
Feingold Blue Book. Yep.
yeah, you want to put your child on it. So this is in PDF. This will be in the show notes for you. So I did find that. The first study on artificial food colors was conducted in 1976 by Connors et al. This is unavailable. I've requested information for it. You can see that here. We have a meta-analysis and then the Schwab and Trin meta-analysis. Bunch of stuff there. It also brings up this artificial food coloring interaction with specific nutrients. Okay, so they go on to say here that mineral content of fruits and vegetables has decreased since the 1930s. Food processing is much more extensive, and that changes the nutrient content in our food in known and unknown ways. However, it's known and unknown, but many processing steps increase nutrient availability. So I'm not sure what they were trying to say, and not sure. So they also go on to say that this is associated with vulnerability to depression, and I'm not sure what ADHD and hyperactivity have to do with depression, but so there's something here with nutrients. Okay, and they report that there have been low serum and tissue levels of iron, zinc, magnesium, and omega-3 fatty acids in children diagnosed with ADHD. So I went on another rabbit hole here. So, okay,
Holy
well,
moly.
what happens when we supplement these things to children with ADHD? Okay, so in regards to zinc, we have a couple here that showed that improved ADHD symptoms. Omega-3 improved symptoms. Zinc supplementation shows improvement. Iron supplementation was a large effect size, but it was not statistically significant, but the effect size was pretty large.
Interestingly enough, these are all areas where people are typically, adults even, are typically deficient in their diets.
And then we have the supplementation of magnesium with vitamin D.
Yep.
Shows improvements in ADHD symptoms.
Interesting
stuff there.
It is interesting.
Here's their conclusion. Additional research should attend to the following points, and they list them, right? And so throughout this meta-analysis, they're kind of like, listen, they brought up a lot of the issues that that we found. So issues due to problems of blinding, placebo effects, you know, um, most of the stuff is coming from outside of the US, blah, 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 blah. But that leads us to another alternative hypothesis, right? So diet is a concept of displacement, meaning whatever I'm eating now displaces something I could be eating instead. Given that serum and tissue nutrient status is inversely associated with ADHD symptoms, so the lower that nutrient is, the higher the ADHD symptom is, and that specific supplementation of those nutrients improves ADHD symptoms, a diet that is high in artificial food colorings is necessarily low in said specific nutrients, right?
Yeah.
So then artificial food colors are not causing ADHD symptoms, but rather it's a diet low in quality that's causing. So artificial food coloring is essentially acting as a proxy measurement for diet quality. All right. So if the proposition is that artificial food colors cause hyperactivity and attention issues in children, and the hypothesis is that artificial food coloring act on neurological functions through the IgE non-dependent histamine release, the alternative hypothesis is that artificial food coloring serves as a proxy for low quality diet, and this diet is causing nutrient deficiencies significant enough such that we can see that these deficiencies are associated with ADHD behavior. So again, what evidence exists that the proposition is more expected under the hypothesis than the alternative?
Gosh, that sounds vaguely familiar.
It sounds vaguely familiar. All right. And again, getting to our selection bias, that leads us to another alternative hypothesis. I talked about this already, right? So we're seeing a rise in diagnoses. We're also seeing a rise in consumption.
Yes.
So
yes.
survivorship bias, specifically dealing with this topic that we're talking about, is where we focus on only those who survived the selection process and neglecting those who didn't. And this can lead to a skewed perception of reality. So as medical advancements have been made, child and infant mortality rates have decreased drastically. Okay, so basically, the reason that we're seeing these increase in ADD and allergy diagnosis is because the children who would have, those children are immunologically weaker, so to speak, than the children without allergies and ADD. And in the past, they would have died off due to infant mortality rates. So the reason that we're seeing increased rates of these things is just because infant mortality rates have gone down, and it doesn't actually have anything to do with artificial food coloring. Okay, so that's the alternative hypothesis. So what evidence exists that the proposition is more expected under the hypothesis than the alternative? Last but not least, we get to the logical fallacies that I see associated with this topic in online discussions, social media stuff. Gish Gallop. Okay, so this is basically where you try to present an overwhelming amount of evidence in order to get your opponent or the audience, whoever is watching. So basically to get your opponent to just basically give up because the amount of evidence is too great to try and handle them one at a time. And then it also, you know, kind of like inflates your position to the audience. So they see, well, this dude has this mountain of evidence, and this dude just kind of gave up when this thing collapsed on him. This is a logical fallacy. We have the OEHHA assessment, which was 330 some odd pages long. It includes all kinds of stuff in there. This Feingold diet book, the vast majority of this book is a list of citations and kind of the outcomes from each of those trials. And then there's also, so this advocacy group, the CSPI, they're the ones who petitioned the FDA to reevaluate the stance on artificial food colorings. They have this. This is also a PDF that is available to you guys through the show notes. And this thing is 70 pages long, and it is basically the same thing as the OEHA assessment, where it's just like, bleh, here's all of this evidence.
Yeah. I looked
Against
at
it.
that. Yeah.
Okay. And now I'm not saying that that these specific publications here are committing the logical fallacy, although I do believe to some small degree there was some small intent in how long these books are and how much stuff is included in them. I can't rule out that there was some small amount of that logical fallacy implied here. I think they're trying to give a comprehensive assessment of it, But anyone who might be presenting this stuff online as an argument for this, you send somebody this OEHHA assessment and it's like, you open it up and you start scrolling through it. And it's like, who's going to take time to read that other than us, right? So if somebody was to use that, that can be a use of that logical fallacy here. We have hasty generalization. So the hasty generalization is based off of insufficient evidence. So the core issue is that the conclusion is not logically justified by the limited evidence provided, or you're jumping to conclusions, right? So that survivorship bias that I talked about. So, well, we're seeing an increase in these diagnoses of ADHD and allergies. We're also seeing an increase. So to draw the conclusion there, that's a hasty generalization. That's a logical fallacy. Appeal to quantity, again, is that here's all of this evidence. How could this not be true, right? Look at all of the evidence I've provided. Appeal to nature is a big one here. The appeal to nature fallacy is something is good or bad, specifically based on whether or not it's natural.
Right.
Okay. Survivorship selection bias. So we talked about that. Now this applies to the meta-analyses as well. If you go into the meta-analyses and also the OEHHA assessment, they'll say, look, we did a comprehensive review and we got back X so many results. Those results are usually quite large in number. And then they have to apply selection criteria, right, to get it down to a certain amount, which might answer some specific questions. And so the ones that survive that selection process, so the information that we're seeing in the OEHHA assessment and the meta-analyses that we look through, that information is biased due to selection bias, right? That has survived the selection process. And in Nig et al., you know what I mean? They corrected for some of that publication bias. So that's what publication bias is they say, we've done this search, we've selected, we've added some exclusion criteria and what's left over, but we have to correct for the possibility that we have excluded things that may, have the opposite effect of what we found. All right, and this leads to misleading conclusions. So by focusing solely on the survivors, we might draw inaccurate conclusions about the bigger pictures. Last but not least here, we have the Moat and Bailey fallacy. So the Moat and Bailey fallacy is a deceptive argument strategy used in conversations and debates, and I see this a lot online, and it relies on having two positions. So one of them is more extreme and it's harder to defend. That's called the Bailey. And the other one is a more moderate position, like it'd be more widely acceptable and it's easier to defend. And that's called the moat. And what people will do is they will shift between the Bailey and the moat. And so for an example here for the artificial food colorings, is we'll see somebody might make an argument. So if somebody presents the more extreme position first, they're usually expecting that their audience either agrees with them or probably is not going to have significant enough pushback. Okay.
Right.
So the Bailey, if the Bailey is presented first here, you might see somebody say something like artificial food coloring is in everything and it's causing an epidemic of ADHD and we need a complete ban to protect our children's health. And so somebody then might counter and say, well, my child doesn't seem to have any problems with these things, right? I'm not experienced. So why should my child have to have his or her favorite food banned, because of the problem? So that's when the person then retreats back to the moat, okay, which is, well, I never said all children have issues, right? It's just natural food coloring still exists. So your kid can still have their favorite food. And it's just, this is what my family practices, but I'm not saying that all children are affected by this, right? So you can see one of those is much more extreme and a little bit harder to defend when challenged. And so when they are challenged, they retreat back to the other. Blech.
Blah. So what I did
Red.
was during this
Go
whole
ahead.
presentation, uh, I did my own experimentation and testing. So by consuming some yellow 5 and yellow 6, and I'm no more hyperactive now than I was when we began the show. So I don't think it affects me at all.
Yeah. All right. So listen, we're going to answer these questions here. Okay. So we're going to put ourselves in the position of this FDA committee, and we're going to answer these questions that were asked them. All right. You ready?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So one, do the current relevant data support the FDA's conclusion as set forth in the September 1st, 2010 interim toxicology review memorandum that a causal relationship between consumption of certified color additives in food and hyperactivity or other adverse effects on behavior in children in the general population has not been established?
True.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, so we both agree that the current data supports the FDA's conclusion that there just doesn't seem to be a causal relationship here. Should additional information be disclosed on the product label of food containing certified color additives to ensure their safe use? So
No,
should there be a warning label, this contains food? So you say
no,
no.
no.
Okay, I say no as well. What do you base?
It's right there. It's right there.
Yeah,
If you don't have any causal data and there's no um, uh, connection established, then putting a warning label on something is really, well, first of all, it's misleading. It's not uh, um, gosh, what's the word when a parent when you do something that's like, oh, it's just misleading and it, yeah, it's like yelling fire in a movie theater.
yeah.
It's not true. So
So
no,
yeah, so I say no as well, and the reason is because I mean, over time, we've added additional labels to food products, and it doesn't seem to influence people's
doesn't.
behavior. We
Nobody reads
have,
that stuff.
yeah, you have the nutrition labels in the back, which contain calories and serving sizes and all these other things, and people just don't make their food decisions and choices based on labels. It's
Right.
more based on whether or not that food tastes good and how convenient it is.
Yes.
So I don't think adding a label to it is going to do anything from a population-wide stance. Yeah. So is there a need for additional studies?
Oh, well, in my opinion, yes, I don't think it has to happen today, but I think that, um, yeah, there's always room for more information. But yeah, I'm going to say yes.
Yeah. So I have two positions here. So one being from the position of like if we were on this committee and answering this question, and it would say yes, right? Because we see that there's obviously some confounding factors that we need to deal with
Yes.
and figure
Yes.
out how to answer those specific questions. We also have come up with several alternative hypotheses that need answering, right? So we have
Yes,
placebo by
absolutely.
proxy that needs to be answered.
Yes.
We have nutritional deficiencies, right? So is it
Yes.
the nutritional deficiency we need that question answered? We need these
Yes.
alternative hypotheses answered. So on
Yes.
that stance, yes, we don't have enough information. There still exists the possibility that
Right.
these food colorings are causing, that there's reason to suspect harm here. But the evidence available that we looked at today, it just can't answer the questions.
I
So on
agree.
that
I agree.
position, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Now the cynical side of me, who likes to force people to accept conclusions they don't want to accept on the basis of their own evidence,
Ha, ha,
says
ha.
says, well, the OEHHA, the CSPI, and whoever's making these claims online seem to believe that there's enough evidence, that evidence is sufficient in regards to banning these things, right? So having gone through them, finding the issues that we have, on that same premise, I would have to say, no, you're going to have to accept that the evidence is sufficient.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I agree. I agree.
All right. Before I close this out, I want to go back up here one more time to the OEHHA, concluding that after extensive review, they could not find any reason in the methodology or bias that might be producing the positive associations found in the study's review. Hold on. Dear Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment from California government, if you need help evaluating these studies, Coach Lamby is available.
And not for free.
Not for free. All
That's
right.
good stuff, man. That's good stuff.
Yeah. So, gosh, like we honestly, we didn't look through that much. This was extensive though. So I want people to understand, we took a good 2.5 weeks to review the information that we looked at here today.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even scratch the surface. I've gone off on, so I'm still interested in this topic.
Right.
And there have been replies from the CSPI in regards to that FDA committee meeting. And then I've also found the transcript from the committee meeting. So I would like to read those things. And then every time I find something on this artificial food, it continues to say, we have new research, we have new research, we have new research. And so I'd like to look into that. This is going to be a multi-part series. Like, this has gone on for a while. I'm going to have to split this one up into 2 episodes. Yeah, man. So did we debunk anything here today? Maybe there was a little bit of debunking.
I feel like it was huge. I feel like it was huge. First of all, well, like we said earlier, it's not that they're lying, but it's kind of misleading. When
there's some misrepresentation happening.
Yes. When OEHHA just says, well, after looking at this information, then it is this. That's not what the information says at all. It's not what the information says. And then even when people start looking at data points, it's like, okay, wait a minute, but look at the confidence levels. That's important. Yeah. So, yeah, so it was my hypothesis, not my hypothesis. It was my opinion at the beginning, at the outset, is that, I really don't think that it's, I really don't think that any of this proved that food colorings are conclusively a factor in causing hyperactivity or ADHD in a child. I'm sorry, it's not even close.
Yeah, based on what we looked at today, I find that amount of evidence there less than convincing, right?
Yes.
So there are problems
well said.
that I see in the methodology. And look, the trials that we looked at, they're double-blinded, they're randomized, placebo-controlled. They are. They have enough participants where they're adequately powered such that we can have confidence in the effect that we're seeing. But there are issues and there are limitations with the way those things are done. I don't have a high degree of confidence in the results coming from those studies.
Agreed.
And, the fact that you have a committee who are saying, well, we extensively reviewed this and we didn't find any reason in the methodology. I'm sorry to say, you did a poor job.
Yeah, exactly. To go through all of that and
yeah. So anyways, I'm going to look through this FDA committee transcript and stuff and see if this is to be continued or not. Again, we haven't conclusively proved here today that artificial food coloring does not have an effect, but the evidence that we saw thus far,
Not conclusive.
I do not have confidence in that.
Yes, agreed.
So,
Agreed.
all right, man. What do you say we cut this off? All right. So, hopefully somebody's mind was blown today. Hopefully somebody takes something away from this, and we will see you guys next time. Coach Lamby and Dwayne out.
See you guys.